My client has maintained her innocence from the beginning. The defense will now present evidence that casts reasonable doubt on these charges.
When Miss Fonan appears before the court this time, she is not simply asking for leniency. She is asking the court to reverse a judgment it made just days earlier. A judgment rooted not in accusation alone, but in behavior observed, verified, and already documented. This distinction matters. Bond hearings are often misunderstood by defendants and the public alike. They are not moral trials. They are not verdicts of guilt. They are assessments of risk. And risk, in the judicial sense, is rarely determined by a single action. It is measured through patterns, from the opening moments the defense attempts to reset the narrative. Miss Fonan's attorney speaks calmly, respectfully, and with visible caution. There is no argument over the past violations. There is no denial. Instead, there is an apology, carefully placed, deliberately phrased. Miss Fonan admits that she missed drug tests. She admits that she tested positive. And perhaps most damaging of all, she admits that she lied to the court. In a courtroom, few words carry more weight than "I lied," because lying does not merely violate a condition. It fractures the very foundation on which bond exists, trust. The defense acknowledges this fracture and tries to repair it by offering assurances. Miss Fonan promises continued testing. She promises compliance. She promises that excuses like phone issues will no longer be used. She presents herself as someone who understands what she did wrong, but understanding wrongdoing is not the same as correcting it. The defense then introduces stability into the equation. Miss Fonan is employed. She is a mother. She has 2 children. At present, those children are living with her sister. This is not accidental framing. Courts are human institutions, and judges are acutely aware of the ripple effects incarceration has on families. The defense is not asking the judge to ignore the violations. It is asking the judge to contextualize them. In many cases, this approach works, but not here, because the judge is already holding a piece of information that reshapes everything. 40-1 phone calls. The judge does not raise his voice. He does not accuse. He simply asks a question that carries quiet gravity. If the children are living with the sister, why is Miss Fonan calling the alleged victim at all? This question lands hard. Bond conditions allow limited contact with the victim, but only by text and only regarding the children. These were not flexible guidelines. They were explicit instructions. Phone calls were not permitted. And 41 of them, made within a single week of custody, are not accidental. The courtroom pauses here because this is the moment when intent becomes relevant. Miss Fonan interjects. She insists there were no arguments, no fights, just conversation, just discussion about the children. But courts do not assess compliance based on tone. They assess it based on boundaries. A phone call is not a text message. And 41 phone calls are not an oversight. They are behavior. The defense attorney is clearly unsettled. This is the first time they are hearing the number. That matters too. It suggests a disconnect between what Miss Fonan has been telling her counsel and what the records actually show. And this disconnect deepens the court's concern. Judges are trained to recognize when explanations evolve to fit new information. And evolution in this context does not inspire confidence. It signals reaction. The judge articulates the core issue with clarity. If the only justification for contact was child care coordination, and the children were not even in the victim's care, then the contact itself becomes questionable on its face. This is no longer a gray area. It is a structural violation. The judge also notes something subtle but critical. People who violate bond conditions often do so not because they misunderstand the rules, but because they believe they can bend them without consequence. This belief that compliance is optional is what bond supervision is designed to detect early. Miss Fonan's prior dishonesty now amplifies every inconsistency. When someone lies to the court, they do not just lose credibility in that moment. They lose it for every explanation that follows. The judge says this plainly. Once you lie, it becomes difficult for the court to believe anything you say. That statement is not punishment. It is reality. At this point, the judge faces a choice. He can proceed as if this is merely a misunderstanding, or he can intervene before the situation escalates further. He chooses intervention. Miss Fonan is ordered back into custody, not as a final decision, not as a condemnation, but as a pause, a containment measure. The judge explains why. The new information changes the landscape. The court cannot responsibly adjust bond without understanding the full scope of the communication. This is how judicial caution works, not reactionary, not emotional, methodical. The defense may feel blindsided, but the court's responsibility is not to protect expectations. It is to protect process. And in this moment, process demands restraint. When proceedings resume, the defense arrives, better prepared, but the damage has already been done. Miss Fonan no longer denies the calls. Instead, she reframes them. She insists that the calls were about the children. She insists that they did not involve the case. She insists there was no pressure, no manipulation, no argument. On a surface level, this distinction matters because if communication involved witness intimidation, new charges could follow. But the judge makes something clear that defendants often misunderstand. Avoiding new charges does not equal compliance with bond. Bond conditions exist to regulate behavior, not merely criminality. The judge acknowledges the defense's argument but dismantles it carefully. Even if every word spoken on those calls was innocent, the calls themselves may still violate a direct court order. This is the heart of the matter. Courts do not only regulate intent, they regulate access, repeated contact, especially in emotionally charged cases involving family dynamics, can create pressure without overt threats. It can influence without explicit instruction. It can destabilize even when framed as concern. And again, the number returns 40-1. The judge explains that a handful of calls might be understandable given custody constraints. But 41 suggests something else entirely, an inability to disengage or an unwillingness to respect imposed limits. This is when the judge raises another red flag. If Miss Fonan was truly calling about the children, why are there no documented calls to the sister, the person actually caring for them? Silence answers louder than words here. The defense cannot provide confirmation. They do not have the sister's phone records. They cannot verify alternate communication. The narrative begins to thin. The judge then addresses the deeper issue. Lying. Once a defendant lies to the court, every future statement becomes suspect. The court is no longer obligated to accept explanations at face value. This is not personal. It is procedural. The judge emphasizes that courts are not designed to micromanage defendants. They rely on compliance. When compliance fails, supervision tightens. Rather than escalate the situation prematurely, the judge chooses a measured response. Phone records will be reviewed. A probable cause hearing is scheduled. A preliminary examination is set, but not rushed. And most significantly, Miss Fonan's phone privileges are revoked entirely. This decision is both practical and symbolic. Practical, because it removes the immediate source of violation. Symbolic, because it signals that discretion has been exhausted. Communication, which had been permitted in narrow form, is now fully suspended until trust can be evaluated again. Miss Fonan remains in custody, not because she has been found guilty, not because the court wishes to punish her, but because uncertainty has grown too large to ignore. This case demonstrates a critical truth of bond supervision. Freedom under bond is conditional, fragile, and dependent on honesty. When defendants begin improvising rules, when they decide which conditions matter and which can be ignored, the court responds by removing flexibility altogether. The judge's final actions are restrained but firm. The message is unmistakable. Bond is not a negotiation. Honesty is not optional. And communication, when abused, becomes control, not care. if you want more real courtroom breakdowns and deep case analysis. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next case.